We all take a drink from the cup. She politely knocked it over.
Before he died, he left a chilling remark. "I never made it because I never wanted to lie." Those words, spoken by Chris Bailey, the voice of the Saints and one of punk's earliest prophets, echo like a funeral bell for a life lived on the edge of rebellion and ruin. While the world remembers the Sex Pistols or the Ramones as the faces of punk rock, it was Bailey and his band in Brisbane, Australia, who released one of the first true punk anthems, "I'm Stranded," before the movement had even found its name. But there's a reason his name doesn't come up in mainstream retrospectives. Chris Bailey didn't play the fame game. He didn't sell out. And in an industry that rewards compliance and charisma, his refusal to bend made him both legendary and invisible. His life is a case study in the cost of staying true to art over commerce, authenticity over fame. This is not the story of a rock star who burned out in a blaze of glory. This is about a man who changed music history, then vanished from its pages. A man who shaped a genre, but died in a modest home with little wealth and even less recognition. Why did the world forget Chris Bailey? Why does Australia, his own country, rarely speak his name when honoring music legends? Tonight, we go back to the cigarette smoke-drenched stages of 1970s Brisbane. We revisit the riots, the records, the rivalries. We uncover the real story behind the rise and fall of a voice that screamed for truth in a world addicted to illusion. To understand Chris Bailey is to return to Brisbane in the early 1970s, a place not known for revolution or rebellion, but for silence, conformity, and control. Queensland was ruled with an iron fist by Premier Joe Bjelke-Petersen, a man who treated dissent like a disease and deployed the police to crush anything that looked like defiance. This was not London, not New York. Brisbane was not the obvious birthplace of punk, but maybe that's exactly why it was. In this suffocating environment, a teenage Chris Bailey, born in Kenya and raised in Australia, found his voice. Or rather, he forged it, hardened by the stale air of suburban repression, sharpened by the sounds of the Stooges and MC5 echoing from imported vinyls. He met guitarist Ed Cooper and drummer Ivor Hay in high school. The trio didn't just want to make noise, they wanted to detonate it. By 1976, the Saints self-released I'm Stranded, a blistering 2-minute howl of frustration and alienation. They pressed just 500 copies, and somehow one found its way to the UK, where the influential magazine Sounds declared it Single of the Week. That was months before the Sex Pistols released Anarchy in the UK. Months before punk had a uniform or a marketing strategy. Chris Bailey had already screamed his truth into the void, and the world had started to listen. But recognition came with a bitter twist. While the UK embraced punk as a cultural uprising, the Saints remained outsiders. Their label, EMI, didn't know how to market an Australian punk band. Bailey refused to wear safety pins or spike his hair. He didn't want to become a mascot for a movement he felt was already becoming hollow. "We weren't trying to be punk," he once said. "We were just trying to survive Brisbane." And survival, it turned out, would become the recurring theme of Chris Bailey's life. As the band gained traction overseas, cracks began to form. Bailey and Cooper clashed over musical direction. One wanted to evolve, the other wanted to keep things raw. The creative friction that had once sparked brilliance soon erupted into something darker. Eventually, Cooper left. The Saints fractured, and Bailey, restless, rebellious, relentlessly honest, was left to carry the name alone. What followed was not the rise of a solo star, but the long, slow burn of a man at odds with the world around him. While his peers chased stardom, Bailey dug into the margins. He moved between record labels, countries, and collaborators, always chasing something pure, something real. But the further he ran from commercial compromise, the more the spotlight faded. And yet, through it all, his voice remained unmistakable, rough, mournful, and searingly intelligent. His lyrics, often laced with irony and existential dread, hinted at a man grappling with more than fame. Chris Bailey wasn't chasing a career. He was documenting a life. As the years passed, the Saints would be quietly inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame. Music historians would cite I'm Stranded as a cornerstone of punk history. But Bailey himself? He remained elusive, shunning celebrity, living modestly, giving interviews that veered between biting sarcasm and poetic melancholy. In a culture that elevates icons and erases the inconvenient, Chris Bailey stood as a contradiction. A pioneer who rejected the pedestal, a rebel who outlasted the riot, only to find himself forgotten. Chris Bailey's story didn't begin with fame, but with defiance. He was never built for the spotlight. He was built to burn through it. Growing up in Brisbane's grey post-war suburbs where Catholic guilt met political conservatism, Bailey developed a voice that questioned everything: authority, religion, conformity, even music itself. His voice, raspy, cynical, vulnerable, was not trained but raw, like a wound that never closed. When the Saints first rehearsed in Bailey's parents' garage in the early 70s, they were more than just loud. They were dangerous. Brisbane police routinely raided their shows. Landlords refused to let them perform. Promoters blacklisted them. But Bailey didn't blink. "They hated us because we didn't care," he once said. "And we didn't care because we knew we were right." That sense of righteous rage bled into I'm Stranded. Recorded cheaply, released independently, it exploded across the UK like a bomb no one saw coming. Suddenly, this obscure trio from Queensland was being compared to punk's royal family. But Bailey was already uncomfortable. Fame didn't suit him. Interviews bored him. He mocked journalists, sneered at trends, and dismissed the very movement he had helped ignite. While others posed, Bailey exposed. EMI signed the Saints, hoping to replicate the success of British punk. But Bailey refused to play the game. He didn't want to be marketed, polished, or managed. He rejected the label's demand for a punk look. When EMI flew the band to London in 1977, Bailey arrived in secondhand clothes, with no intention of pretending. He played the music harder, angrier. But behind the scenes, the cracks were deepening. Ed Cooper, a brilliant guitarist and perfectionist, wanted to push the band into art rock. Bailey, ever the emotional core, wanted grit and soul. Their fights became legendary, explosive, creative, destructive. During one show in Paris, they stopped mid-set to scream at each other on stage. The Saints had become too big for their own rebellion. By 1979, Cooper was gone. So was the band's original sound. Bailey kept the Saints alive, but what emerged was something else: darker, moodier, and more introspective. Albums like Prehistoric Sounds and A Little Madness to Be Free revealed a man wrestling not just with fame, but with himself. The punk sneer gave way to poetic sorrow. He sang of loneliness, urban decay, and disillusionment with a world that had moved on. While his contemporaries moved to arenas, Bailey retreated into the shadows. He toured constantly, often in small venues, sometimes drunk, sometimes brilliant, always unpredictable. He became known for his intensity, his refusal to repeat himself, and his haunting presence on stage. Audiences never knew what version of Bailey they'd get: angry prophet or weary ghost. In the 80s and 90s, the Saints, now more of a solo project, released records that critics praised but the public ignored. Bailey collaborated with artists across Europe, recorded in France, lived for a time in Sweden, and kept moving. He spoke several languages. He read poetry. He wrote like a man exorcising demons. But his music stopped charting. His shows grew smaller, his interviews darker. And yet, even at his most obscure, there was always something: a flicker of brilliance, a line that hit like a confession, a performance that cut through the noise. Bailey never lost the fire. He just stopped showing it to people who couldn't understand it. He was not forgotten entirely. In 2001, the Saints were inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame. Bailey accepted the honor with dry wit and visible detachment. He didn't crave the moment, and he didn't pretend to. When asked about legacy, he simply said, "I'm not a legacy kind of guy. I'm still breathing, aren't I?" But behind the sarcasm, something had changed. Years of touring had taken their toll. His health declined. He lived simply, often alone, in modest surroundings. The punk prophet who once lit fires across continents was now growing old, not bitter, but tired. And still, he refused to compromise. Chris Bailey didn't fall in flames. He faded like a whisper, slow, deliberate, and defiant to the end. In his final years, Chris Bailey became a ghost in his own legend, a man whose voice had once terrified authority, now reduced to playing in dimly lit bars, sometimes to audiences who didn't even know his name. The Saints, the band that had pioneered punk from the fringes of the world, had been written out of most popular histories. And Bailey? He never asked to be remembered. But the silence surrounding him became its own kind of tragedy. The world had moved on. Punk had become commercial. Bailey watched as others, less talented, more marketable, were celebrated, interviewed, lionized. He said little, but in rare interviews, he allowed brief glimpses of pain. In a 2013 radio interview, his voice cracked as he said, "I wasn't supposed to be a star. I was just trying to tell the truth, and that's not something people reward." He lived in a small rented flat in New South Wales. Friends described him as reclusive, but not bitter. He still wrote songs, still picked up his guitar, still read voraciously, Baudelaire, Bukowski, Orwell, but he had stopped trying to explain himself to the world. "They didn't want me when I was loud," he said once, "and now that I'm quiet, they don't even know I'm here." Rumors swirled about his mental health, his drinking, his financial situation. One close friend quietly admitted, Chris was always a storm. But near the end, the storm was just inside him. He had no manager, no PR team, no Instagram, no handlers. Just a man, aging, stubborn, and still loyal to the art that gave him meaning. In one of his last public performances in 2019, Bailey walked on stage looking thinner, frailer. He tuned his guitar in silence, then said to the crowd, "I'm not going to tell you stories. I've told them all already. If you listened, thank you. If you didn't, well, you missed some good ones." Then he played a stripped-down version of Ghost Ships, and those who were there say it felt like a farewell no one had prepared for. When news broke of his death in April 2022, it barely registered in the mainstream. There were no tribute concerts, no trending hashtags, just a few lines in music journals, a quiet nod from old fans, and a collective shrug from a world that never truly embraced him. It was, perhaps, the ending Bailey had anticipated his whole life. But the truth, the dark, aching truth, is that Chris Bailey was always telling us this would happen. Through every lyric, every snarled line, every interview cloaked in irony, he warned us, fame is hollow, truth is costly, and the world forgets the ones who refuse to lie. One story stands out. After a gig in Berlin in the late 90s, a fan approached Bailey and asked, "Don't you ever want to be rich?" He reportedly laughed and said, "If I was rich, I wouldn't be me. And if I wasn't me, none of this would have mattered." In that moment, perhaps, lies the essence of Chris Bailey. He could have played the game. He could have followed the industry. But he chose the hard road, the lonely road. And while that road led to a quiet death, it also carved out a legacy built not on fame, but on defiance, art, and brutal honesty. When we speak of legends, we often mean those who were crowned by the world. But there is another kind, the ones who never bowed, who died unknown but never betrayed themselves. Chris Bailey was that kind. Chris Bailey was not the kind of artist who sought approval, and perhaps that's exactly why he remains one of the most misunderstood figures in Australian music history. In a culture eager to decorate icons and rewrite rebellion into nostalgia, Bailey never gave permission to be softened. He was jagged, volatile, honest to a fault, and because of that, many turned away. But those who listened, really listened, found something extraordinary in his voice. A deep ache, a restless intellect, a refusal to compromise. At Aussie Uncovered, we don't look for stars in the traditional sense. We look for stories that pulse with truth, no matter how uncomfortable. And Chris Bailey's story is one of the rawest we've uncovered. He didn't just pioneer punk rock, he embodied its core philosophy long after the world turned it into fashion. While others wore rebellion like a costume, Bailey bled it. He never pretended to be someone he wasn't. He never sanitized his message for the masses. And for that, he paid a heavy price. The industry didn't know what to do with him. He was too intelligent to be manipulated, too raw to be branded. His lyrics weren't slogans, they were observations, full of wit, sarcasm, sorrow. He dissected the world in ways that were uncomfortable, and he did it with a voice that sounded like it had lived every word. It's no surprise he was pushed to the margins. But it is a tragedy that we let him stay there. What does it say about us as a culture that a man who gave so much to music could be forgotten so quietly? That the same country that watched him fight against the suffocating conservatism of 1970s Brisbane would later fail to honor him properly? Bailey wasn't just part of Australia's musical history. He challenged it. He demanded more from it. And we failed to answer. To those who only know punk through its most famous faces, we urge you, go back. Listen to the saints. Hear the fury in I'm Stranded. Hear the sorrow in A Little Madness to Be Free. Hear the man who warned us, through every snarled line and haunting melody, that truth doesn't come easy and that the price of being real is often being alone. Chris Bailey was not forgotten because he lacked talent. He was forgotten because he refused to sell it. So what do you think? Was Chris Bailey a visionary punished for his honesty, or simply a rebel who chose obscurity over compromise? Was his fall a reflection of his choices, or a damning indictment of how the industry treats those who won't play along? We've given you the story. Now we want to hear yours. Some voices don't echo in arenas. They hum through back alleys, whisper across forgotten vinyl, flicker in the static of an old radio at midnight. Chris Bailey's voice was one of them. Never loud enough for the mainstream, but unforgettable for those who heard it. He never chased adoration. He didn't want to be remastered, reissued, repackaged. He wanted to be felt, not remembered. And maybe that's why his legacy lingers like smoke, faint, ungraspable, and undeniably real. There's a strange beauty in how he lived, a refusal to play the game, a commitment to truth over popularity. In an age where every artist is a brand, Bailey remained a man, flawed, brilliant, haunted, and through it all, defiantly himself. We don't often speak of Chris Bailey when we talk about Australian icons. His name isn't etched in bronze or stitched onto a walk of fame, but for those who know, who remember, he changed everything. He carved punk into the bones of a conservative city. He made noise when silence was expected. He spoke when others stayed quiet. And when the world turned away, he kept going. Some stories are never told, but now you know. Chris Bailey didn't need your applause. He only wanted you to hear him. And if you've made it this far, maybe you finally did.